boy, has this been a couple of weeks for Latter-day Saints. Holy moly. First we get Charlie Kirk, then we lose our prophet, and then the very next day we end up with a chapel in Michigan being shot at and completely burned to the ground. It's a lot. I've talked a little bit about the Charlie Kirk situation and the connection there, but I wanted to talk briefly about the Michigan shooting, what we know so far, how it relates to the church, and all of that. In another videos very soon, I'll be talking about the death of Russell M. Nelson, our prophet, what he has done and what he meant to the church, context as to how the church does succession, what to expect, who's coming next and what that means, and so forth. So stay tuned for all of that. Hopefully I'll do this with minimal editing issues so we can get this up relatively quickly. Let's do it. So if you're new here, I'm Annette Lyon, USA Today bestselling author of the suspense novel Just One More and a whole bunch of other stuff, here for the true crime and where it intersects with religion and often my own faith, which is Latter-day Saints. This is also where it's a safe place, so no comments derogatory or about any faith tradition, including my own, please, thank you, and goodbye. All right, so what we do know about the shooting that happened on Sunday, the 28th of September, about 10:25 or so a.m. local time, Thomas Jacob, home by Jake, it sounds like, Sanford, drove his truck into the back of the chapel. He drove it into the building, broke down a good chunk of the wall, went in, started shooting people. It appears he also used an accelerant of some sort, I think gasoline, lit the place on fire. It is now a complete loss. 10 people were taken to the hospital. 2 of those have since passed. They have discovered 2 or 3 more in the rubble who likely died of injuries because of the fire. We know there are 5 fatalities, not counting him, although he has passed as well. I haven't heard confirmation. This is as of the 29th, Monday, as to how the 5th person passed, but I'm assuming so was someone found in the rubble of the building, because as far as we know, there are still 8 people in the hospital. The victims, from what I understand, range from the age of 6 up to 78. Sanford was 40 years old. We know that at least one officer arrived within about 30 seconds. Within 8 or 9 minutes, more had arrived, and he had been what they call neutralized. He is no longer with us. In a shootout, I believe it was in the parking lot. One member of the congregation who had run into his car, it sounds like with his family. There were more than him in the car. We know that because there's some of how he described it. And the shooter shot 3 times at his vehicle, smashed out the windshield, and he had blood spatter on him when he was interviewed by the news. But he and his family are all right. I can't imagine. There was a woman who was interviewed who was there. She said that she had joined the church, I think she said 38 and a half years ago, something like that, and had always attended this particular building, and how it's gone, how devastating that is. And that she said some of the victims, plural, I don't know if she knew for sure at this point, were some of her primary children students. So Primary is a children's organization from ages 3 to 12. So she would teach them whatever age group that she had. So she was a teacher for them. And she, of course, had lost friends and was devastated. There was a young father, I believe his name was, if I recall, Paul Kirby. He was also interviewed by the media. He heard a big bang and the back of the chapel wall caved in. So we know from pictures that it was the wall that was facing the street. Typically, that would be the front of the chapel for most buildings. So that's what I assumed. A lot of people in the media keep saying that he rammed through the front doors. There's no door there. There is a decorative element that is rectangle and may have looked like a door, but he rammed through that whole wall. There's no door there. I thought perhaps he'd rammed in through a lobby door on the side. There are doors on the sides. You can see some of that. It looks like there's even 2 doors that do go into the chapel, smaller ones. That might have been or I'd say overflow, or for maybe even bringing a casket out or something along those lines. But he did not ram through doors. He ran through an entire brick wall. As of Monday, everyone is accounted for. That was one concern on Sunday. They were saying that the 2 had passed at the hospital, and that they had 2 other victims so far, but they hadn't gone through all the rubble yet, and there were people that were unaccounted for. Now they're saying they have yet to go get through the rest of the rubble. It was a very large building, From what it looks like, it's significantly larger than your average LDS chapel, but everyone is accounted for. So they do not expect to find any more victims, which is a relief. That they talked about some of the first responders, and they didn't elaborate whether this was police, fire, or EMTs, or even at the hospital, medical staff there, but that some of them were actually members serving their own. Some IEDs were found. Initial report said so that they were in his vehicle. Now, officials aren't confirming where they were, but because they had found some IEDs or improvised explosive devices, they've assumed that there's a very good likelihood this person has probably created more. So they had bomb team come to search his home when they got a warrant for that, because there would likely be explosives too there. One element that was particularly terrifying for me to think about is in the fall. This is the season in Latter-day Saint congregations when the primary children, again ages 3 to 12, put on their annual little performance. They call it the primary program, and they sing the songs they've learned over the years, and each child gets up and says a little part into the microphone, and it's it's kind of the culmination of what they've learned across since January. It's a very sweet, sometimes as people's favorite um, Sabbath worship session of the year. So this could have been a primary program, and then where children could have been a target. It doesn't sound like it was, thank heavens. But that's horrifying to think that that could have been another element. They're calling it a targeted attack of violence. I have heard people say, "Oh, because the FBI is involved, that means it's going." They're looking at it as a terrorist thing. That's not what FBI means. FBI means there could be a federal element. There could be local law enforcement asking for help, which they do in kidnapping cases and all kinds of other cases. I do believe that this is going to be considered a hate crime or a domestic terrorism situation, but just because the FBI is involved, that's not what that means. As far as motive, it does sound like he had some animosity toward members of the church. There's a city council candidate named Chris Johns who posted to Facebook that was canvassing, just knocking door to door, talking to citizens in the area, and came across Sanford and had a 20-minute conversation with him, which sounded lovely at first, just chit chat and whatnot. This happened about a week ago. Sanford talked about he had been in the Marines. He had served in Iraq. He was only in the Marines for about 4 years, suffered of PTSD. He had a child that had some genetic disorder, all of these different issues. But then the conversation shifted into anti Latter-day Saint territory. He talked about living in Utah briefly. I don't know how long, but he dated a woman here whose parents were LDS. So I'm wondering if maybe she was not. Because of that relationship, he somehow has it in his head that Latter-day Saints are the Antichrist. There's some level of motive. What made him do it now? And why target this particular chapel? Who knows? So that is essentially what we know as of the 29th, Monday the 29th. This whole thing it's terrifying. Part of what I want to bring up to my fellow Latter-day Saints is that the culture or the vibe in the country right now, there's so much going on politically that's divisive and everything else. And the idea of having a Christian government sounds lovely in theory and on paper, but you have to remember that the reason that separation of church and state was baked into the Constitution is to save us from people who get to pick and choose what flavor of Christianity is quote unquote correct. We don't want the government doing that. Keep in mind that all of the early colonists who came to the US seeking religious freedom, they were all Christian, or at least 90+% of them were. They were a different variety of Christian, whether it was Quakers or Protestants, very just different Protestants, Catholics, whoever. They all had their own version, and they were persecuted. Just think Henry VIII. Think that the Catholics are persecuted in England, and then the Protestants are persecuted in Ireland, and all of this. You don't want a religion at the head of your government, period, unless it is God himself. No, absolutely not. I want you to picture the craziest person in your congregation and imagine them deciding what is right and what is wrong and what laws should apply, what your daughter gets to wear, what your wife gets to say or do, education she gets to pursue. No, this is why we need it to be separate. And the Christian nationalist movement is terrifying. And there's also the point that most Christian Evangelicals do not believe Latter-day Saints are Christian. Yes, we believe in the Jesus Christ of the New Testament. They don't care. Because our theology differs in any way, shape, or form from theirs, we don't count as Christian. So if and when they get into power, we will get oppressed. Guaranteed. This is something I feel very strongly about, that we need to stop in its tracks. But I will also point out that we have a huge disparity in how the current administration responded to the Charlie Kirk murder and then this shooting. Immediately after Charlie Kirk we learned what had happened. This is leftist, extremist, whatever, before we knew anything. This time, it was actually a measured response, saying we don't know anything, wait till we find out, yada yada. That is the correct response for any shooting, for any kind of horrible event like this. We need to wait, learn the facts, find out. In this case, why is it measured? Because maybe we learned in a couple of weeks that, the Charlie Kirk gunman was a conservative white Christian kid who actually might have been right radicalized. Maybe you should have waited. And also that Sanford was clearly a Trumper. We have seen all kinds of posts that he had on social media, pictures of himself wearing a Trump 2020 shirt. I'll make liberals cry again. And the truck he drove into the chapel had 2 American flags on the back. This is one of theirs. I'm not saying that all MAGA people are evil. I'm just saying there is a pattern, and we need to be careful. And we need to stop pointing fingers at the left, especially when it comes to gun violence, because that is not a left problem. It's just not. And if you say it's a mental illness problem, fine, then let's fund mental health care. Why are we no longer funding it? The administration has been pulling away funding for mental health care. You can't have it both ways. And my heart goes out to anyone who's been affected in Michigan. Honestly, it's getting scarier just to go to church. That should never be the way it is. If anyone knows someone who was there, I would love to talk with them if they would be interested in being on my channel or even off the record. I would love to hear from someone personally, because I can't even imagine. No one should have had to live through that. Time for some chocolate.